Ukraine is gathering strength, and Russia is preparing. However, if the spring offensive, which has been talked about for a long time, is to gain decisive significance, the target of the Ukrainian army's offensive should be located in Crimea. At that time, it will be an uphill battle for either side. International media that closely follow the war in Ukraine said after comparing the latest satellite images that the Russian army is strengthening the defenses of Crimea, turning the border area of the Crimea peninsula into a solid barrier. As part of the defense, the Russian military has also erected a sea barrier at the port of Sevastopol, which is the base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. However, satellite images show that the trenches there have not been completely completed, and the fortifications in various areas have not been fully connected. It is worth noting that trenches also appeared in the deep south of Crimea. This shows that the Russian army is worried that the Ukrainian army is likely to continue to advance south along the two main roads after breaking through the first line of defense. If the Russian army is on the defensive in Crimea, then they are likely to increase their strikes against the Ukrainian army in the Donbass region. In any case, the capture of Crimea has extremely important political and military implications. Politically speaking, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his team will succeed in delivering on their repeatedly stated promises. According to them, the war started in Crimea and will end in Crimea. The United States and NATO are also very staunchly supporting Ukraine on the Crimea issue. In other words, if the Ukrainian army chooses to seize Crimea, it will still receive assistance from the West. If the Ukrainian army is victorious, it will prove the point that a country's internationally recognized borders cannot be forcibly altered by force. Militarily speaking, if the Ukrainian army successfully retakes Crimea, then the Ukrainian army has achieved a decisive advantage in Donbass and Bakhmut. Last year, the Ukrainian military pointed out that if Ukraine did not retake Crimea, then Crimea would be a Russian territory that threatened Ukraine. The Crimean Peninsula was, and still is, the basis for Russian aggression in southern Ukraine. From here, the Russian army can deploy and send a large number of troops, and provide resource supplies. The problem Putin faces is this: if the Russian army defends Crimea, then the Russian army will gain the Donbass region. If the Russian army loses Crimea, then the Russian army will likely face a complete defeat. Therefore, the Battle of Crimea will be very difficult. Although the Ukrainian army regained thousands of square kilometers of land in the Kharkov region in Kherson last September, Crimea is completely different. Analysts consider Crimea to be one of the most defensive strategic regions in the world. It has everything a defender needs, including ample defensive depth, narrow entrances, easy air cover and sea interception, which will create a lot of resistance for an attacker. The United States also believes that expelling Russian troops from the Crimean Peninsula will be an extremely difficult military task. According to the confidential U.S. military documents leaked on social media recently, the U.S. estimates that if the spring offensive is fully launched, the casualties of the Russian army will be between 180,000 and 220,000, while the casualties of the Ukrainian army will reach 120,000 to 130,000 between. Compared with the huge casualties, many Western countries supporting Ukraine seem to be more worried about another risk, that is, the offensive of the Ukrainian army on the battlefield, especially the attack on the Crimea Peninsula, may anger Putin and make him like it has retaliated with tactical nuclear weapons, as it has threatened many times earlier, leading to a dire escalation of the war. However, now, more and more analysts believe that the Crimea Peninsula, which seems impenetrable, may actually be a real breakthrough. Spring is here and May is just around the corner, so when will the spring offensive begin? Some analysts in the United States said that when the battlefield situation reaches the point where the Russian army is extremely exhausted and the Ukrainian army is at its optimum, then a decision needs to be made. The Ukrainian army estimates that at least 10 to 20 brigades are needed to regain Crimea. These combat troops will replace the original Soviet-era equipment with modern weapons provided by NATO allies, and it will take about 5 to 7 months. As for Putin's nuclear threats, Ukraine will ignore them.